Okay, well, I have many more questions, but my time has run out. It's your time now. Okay.
2 questions at a time.
And we will take 2 questions at a time. So if you could stand up and state your name and your question, please, no statements, just quick, simple questions. On my right. Sorry, who?
Oh,
On my left.
Ren Carlo, I'm a PhD candidate at Melbourne. There's been relatively...
You really said something off there, Brent.
There's been relatively little comment tonight about the source documents of Islam or Islamic Christianity. Now, as we all know, both the Old and New Testament, of the Tanakh and the Old and New Testament, have problematic issues. Death or desecrating the Sabbath, or being gay, or adultery, and all the rest of it. And Jewish and Christian sages have spent many hours and years and centuries debating whether or not this should be implemented or tolerated. Now, the Quran has, like Christian and Jewish documents, troublesome elements and good elements. Tonight, quite a few of those, if you like, humanistic good elements have been brought out, but there's also these troubling elements that haven't really been discussed. And my understanding, and I'm not a Muslim, is that a lot of the nicer elements were abrogated by some of the more troublesome elements. Now, how does this work in a democracy where Quran is the word of God and therefore cannot be abrogated? But if some of those statements in the Quran are contradictory to democracy, how do we...
Brent, I think we did talk about this issue a little bit when we talked about difficulties that Muslims may have under Sharia with democracy. We don't really want to get into a theological discussion of the Quran, if you don't mind.
Maybe I can just make one comment on that.
Okay. Well, we'll take a second question, and then we will, if they want to, if the guests want to speak to it, they may. Sorry.
Okay. I've got a question for Hana Assafiri and Dr. Doig. So, Hana, it seemed like when I was listening to you, we were talking very much about Hana's Islam as opposed to the Islam that is practiced widely around the world. And Dennis Dragovich, a senior fellow at Melbourne University, I remember during my research, and Andrew March, professor at Yale, does a lot of work on Islam and liberal democracy, and he said it is problematic. There are issues, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't acknowledge some of those problems that are widely seen as being problematic and say just your interpretation is something that's unique and your own. And just on your point about, well, where do all the wars come? Encyclopedia Wars says about 2% historically of all people died in wars are from religious wars. Dr. Doig, you mentioned about crime and not needing religion for a society to manage crime. There's a book, More God, Less Crime, by Byron Johnson that collated all of the studies on that. And one of the anecdotes he gives is, if 2 kids are by a window and there's a mobile phone, one of the kids says, well, let's grab it, no one will notice. And the other kid says, well, God will notice. And there are these studies that show that actually having that fear that someone is watching actually does constrain people's behaviours. Can you comment on that?
We'll start with the first question, and the first part of your question. Hana.
I guess I mean, in order to understand Islam, I guess, you need to understand Islam. And I don't know who is, and I don't know specifically what you're referring to around the tensions between Western democracy and its compatibility with Islam. That is just a broad statement. If you want to give me something specific, I'm happy to have a specific conversation where we can understand its nuance, and often it's founded on a misinterpretation of the historical or the written context of the Quran. When I earlier spoke about Islamic foundational principles, they're not negotiable. They're foundational principles everybody agrees with. So if every Muslim should agree with. So if there's an interpretation that is an expression in some society that is departed from those principles, then it's that definition that is wrong, not the principles of Islam.
Can a Muslim serve in a non-Muslim army?
Of course he can. Of course he can.
Most scholars would disagree with
Well, with scholars, I started by saying we have severed women from the conversation. we have a very skewed interpretation of Islam, that everything on offer at the moment is a departure from Islam and Islamic principles. That's what I've said. So we can't then use those examples and say, well, this now is an example of Islam. No, it's not. So in Islam itself, there's no compulsion in Islam. You're not forced to be a Muslim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'm the only one that understands what's in your heart. Doesn't matter what you say to people. Therefore, I'm the only one that judges. I'm the only one that can take life. I'm the only one. Yet people walk around masquerading as, I don't know, soldiers of God and getting up to nonsense. So when I say this is my understanding of Islam, this is my connection and expression of a faith that is founded on these principles, that what is on offer at the moment is a departure of from those principles. And I say it unequivocally. So that is my response to you. Unless you want to give me something specific and tangible that I can address.
Just want to address what you said, troubling parts of Quran, you know, that idea. According to what criteria and on what basis are these verses troubling? I think that was the point that I made in the second point of introduction tonight. Like for example, let's take Prophet Muhammad saying, and a man and a woman should not be in the same place in a closed space together. For much of the last 20 years, we discussed this and people thought that this was sexist. It was, you know, discriminatory against women, and it should change. But now, after the Me Too movement, a lot of men, and these are like in the Western world, men are saying, we're never going to be in the same room, or a man and a woman should not be in the same room, because it can lead to harassment or false allegations. So you can see that it was actually a good advice, good teaching from Prophet Muhammad. What we thought was maybe problematic turns out to be good. So you could apply that to any verse in the Quran. It may look problematic now with this context and our way of thinking, but you don't know that those teachings may solve future problems. What is the basis? What is the basis of our critique of the Quran? That's what I would come back with that.
The apostasy laws now? What about the apostasy laws?
There's nothing in Quran about apostasy. Like apostasy, when you look at a few examples, it was treason that was the issue. Because when a person left Islam, they went to the other side to fight Muslims. And there is actually la ikraha fid din, Quran says. There's no compulsion in religion, you know.
What about, sorry, I'm no expert here.
But I do admit that apostasy laws entered into Sharia through medieval times, and that it became not treason but just changing religion would be punishable by death. But now you could argue by using the same sources, Quran, Hadith and so on, you could argue against it. And that's what Muslims should do. There has to be a scholarly engagement with the Quran in its own terms. You know, I'm not suggesting here that everything we say or Muslims understand about Islam is correct. Maybe we've misunderstood Islam. Maybe we've applied it wrong. And you could go back and check, and where it's open to interpretation, you could interpret. And much of the social reflection of Islam is, by the way, is open to interpretation.
Of course. Meredith, would you like to?
Let's make a distinction between behaviour and thinking. If all Muslims around the world behaved in a compassionate, social justice-oriented way that Hana advocates or Mehmet justifies, I don't think there would be a problem. But the fact is they don't. And Mehmet, with respect, I think you can take any behaviour and find a verse either in the Bible or in the Quran to rationalise post the event whether that behaviour is good or bad. So
Can you give an
I'm
example?
well, the one that you gave.
Which one?
The man and
Innate.
woman shouldn't be in an enclosed space together. And, oh, well, now after the Me Too movement, that seems to be wise. Well, I don't think a lot of men are saying that that is wise. Maybe who is it, Vice President of the United States might say it's wise, or one of those people. A very small number of men might say that's
Well,
wise,
there's a
or
whole
women.
movement.
But look,
on
with
this
respect, that's just post hoc rationalisation of something. Somebody else might use a different phrase from the Quran to justify their behaviour, and that behaviour may not be so benign. I want to come back to your question about, I don't know whether I mentioned crime, but I think it was about being good and doing good. And just remind me of the question.
A
That you
lot
had
of
in
research has been done to show that religion actually helps, and one of the
Right.
examples of how it helps sort of stick two kids by a window.
Right, right. Well, look, you can't just generalise from an anecdote.
No, but a lot of research, like I said, there's a book
And-
that compiles all the system.
And you know, I'm sure that I can find research and evidence to show that it's really where there is a respect for individual rights and a legal system, political system and legal system to enforce respect for those individual rights, which is where it's most likely that crime will be avoided, rather than consideration. I'm not saying that, you know, a person of faith may not find or use their sense of guilt to forbear from doing a bad act. But a person who doesn't have faith would find other ways of forbearing to do a bad act as well. It's not, I don't really think that it's an argument in favour of religion or against religion. I'm just not sure that it's a very important argument.
I agree.
I would just put a different slant on that, Dennis. It seems to me that what you've said is a variation on what Hana has said, you know, that from within a particular religious tradition, you can see the benign impact that it could have, that at its best it does have, in fact. But if we step back a little from the detail and say, instead of kids fearing that God is watching, we have kids well formed in terms of moral attitudes and well socialised rather than feral, and that religion is one variation on that kind of formation, then we're likely to get good behaviour. But I think if you went to, let's take an arbitrary case, 19th century Ireland, largely Catholic even if under British Protestant rule, there were a lot of feral and impoverished kids, there was a lot of crime and a lot of bad behaviour, all right? So I wouldn't say religion per se, much less any specific religion, is the solution to social delinquency or crime. I would say good moral formation is, and that can come in a number of ways.
It's called reflection and maturity and development and progress, and that's okay. The one thing I would say to, whether it be the Quran, any phrase, any sentiment, any conversation, it's about the environment in which we interpret it. And I'm somebody who believes whether we're talking about the House of God or the House of Parliament, they are founded on subjugating women, and that re-enabling women will progress societies differently. That's one thing. And equally, I think when we made and alluded to the reference of ego, and because I think at the moment as a society people are struggling for meaning beyond the material kind of consumerist society, which is futile. So for someone like me, finding meaning in the transient nature of life gives my life meaning and enables me to live the sort of lifestyle that is more constructive and more productive as a citizen, whereas others who just continue to aspire to buy and consume, and I think they're the kind of bigger philosophical questions for a society who no longer has meaning beyond the material consumer I guess, reality of that society. And you know, sadly, philosophy is no longer on offer. It is relegated to the elite, if at all. It's not part of our daily conversations. We're living a populist, soundbite society. People are disengaged. People are apathetic. suicide is through the roof. I mean, there's a whole host of really profound philosophical issues that are much more important to discuss than does the Quran say this, should I interpret it literally,
Hana, we've really got to move on.
yeah,
Sorry.
or more metaphorically.
More questions. This is good. Let's go.
David Schutz from the Ecumenical and Interfaith Commission of the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, and a few other things. Just come from the Jewish Christian Muslim Association's winter conference for the last 2 days, where we're talking about listening to one another, and we did. But immediately I've just come from ACU, where I've taught 2 classes for their core curriculum. Now, every single student of ACU, if they want to graduate from that institution, has to pass a double unit in what is essentially connecting their professional learning with ideas of the common good. There is a question. The question is here. In there, we have 2 principles that give to the common good. One is the innate dignity of human beings. The other one is the stewardship of creation. Now, I point out to them that there are different ways of coming at this idea, but the way they're formulated in Catholic social thought is that there is a creator who has made the human being in his image, and therefore the human being has dignity. There is a creator who has made the world around us, and therefore we respect that. And so this is the foundation for those 2 key connectors.
And the question is?
Okay, and the question is, how there's a point of basis. If we do not have a religious point there, where is the point that we are going to seek to make this relationship with the beyond us, the other human being? What makes the difference between a human being and just stuff?
Okay, so where does the inalienable dignity come from?
That's it.
Without
Where
religion.
does, but not just
Okay.
human dignity, but the sacredness of the world.
And the sacredness of creation.
Yeah.
Okay, and one other question. Did you have your hand up for a question?
Oh.
Since I'd like to have a lady if possible. Down the back there.
She's here.
Oh, sorry, over here. Okay.
There's no
Yes, you.
microphone.
Shout it out.
I'm Lara Hookwood, and I'm a former Jehovah's Witness. And I'm very interested in knowing from Dr. Paul Monk, and also from, can I be cheeky and say Dr. Oz?
Dr.
They call me
okay.
that. I'm really interested in knowing your thoughts on why the world is going to be predominantly atheist in our lifetime, because the projections have shown that we are going to be atheists. So what do you think that is? As a world population.
I suspect we have very different views of that.
Well, as I understand it, at the moment, 84% of the world's population professes a religion. We're a long way from being an atheist majority.
I saw
However,
projections at 2029 or
the question is not to me, and I'm not going to.
Look, one response to that is that there are as many kind of atheists as there are monotheists, and I wouldn't draw any particular comfort from the idea that everybody be an atheist. I think there are more important questions at issue, and I think I tried to make clear this evening that in a lot of ways, in terms of core values and way of trying to operate, I feel a lot in common with Hana and Mehmet. We're not antagonists up here. There are also demographic projections that, in fact, religious believers, and Muslims not least, will be the majority in the relatively near future, at least temporarily, because they have more children. And atheists are very often educated, affluent people in the West who choose not to have children. They have very few. They're not replacing themselves. So I'm not sure where the projections came from that you have, but they may very well not turn out to be true. And I'm not out to convert everybody to atheism. I'm out to find common principles which will enable us to build a pluralistic 21st century civilization, because we're a long way from that right now.
What about inalienable dignity?
Oh, that's a separate matter. Yeah.
Do you have anything to say to that? As a non-religious person, how do you guarantee, or do you indeed want to guarantee inalienable dignity?
I would simply say that we now have a perspective, archaeological, biological, etc., on how human beings evolved and how we built civilizations over time. We have vastly more data than anybody who founded the monotheistic religions, and we can now see them as experiments, as human beings trying to make sense of the cosmos and of the nature of our humanity. We can build on that foundation if we're careful and constructive. And we have a lot of thinking to do, because those religions may, at their best, as Hana has argued, conduce to human dignity and stewardship, but very frequently they fail badly. And so indeed have atheistic regimes that try to uproot religion. So I wouldn't put an emphasis on a particular doctrine, but I would encourage the general tenor of what you're teaching at the ACU, because you're heading in the right direction.
Perhaps we could have another few questions.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think it's been addressed here, those
Yes.
questions.
There's another woman there, and another woman there. A few women there.
Dr. Meredith, Rob, retired gentleman in leisure. A little bit, just now, Paul's finally got on to what I was hoping you might have been a strong spokesperson for. And we've had some marvellous developments over the last 20 years. I love the MMI. Neurology.
Sorry, the question there?
Yeah, the question is, how do we present the findings and the knowledge that has come up about human behaviour in this discussion, re various religions, very philosophical. I'm hearing philosophy tonight, I'm not hearing religion. I also didn't hear any definitions of terms, and it's obvious that people's fundamental definition of religion would be, there's probably perhaps 5 different interpretations.
So, but the question is about how to
The question is,
transfer knowledge of scientific achievement.
Yep, rationalists challenge or perhaps input of information of latest scientific, which you in your little prelogue mentioned how important that was. How do we bring that into this conversation?
Thank you. And yes, yes.
I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I think I'm there in the sea. And I just wanted to add something because I think I know much about it. About being men and a man like alone in just one like room. This doesn't mean that all men are bad or like every situation. If I go, I would like there will be like harassment or something, but it means that we women will try like to be protected, because also in Islam harassment isn't only about like an action or a behavior. Sometimes it can be like by looking or by like talking. So I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. We will take that. We'll take that as a comment rather than a question. But we thank you for the clarification.
There's a lady over there too.
My question is from Hana. So she mentioned thrice up till now that one of the ways for making, like getting rid of many of the problems is by enabling women and empowering them. So my question is, isn't the religion Islam inherently making women less powerful and taking some of the power from them by giving them lesser rights and inheritance and many other things? So if you are actually promoting Islam, then you can't at the same time promote equal or stronger women's rights. And if you are actually promoting women's rights, then are you still in those realms of Islam, or you are actually creating another moderate version of Islam out of that thing?
Is Islam inherently misogynistic?
No. The simple answer is Islam is
Well, could I
absolutely
just
not.
answer this guy's question first?
Okay.
Oh,
sorry,
is that where we're going?
So
So you
as
can
I
answer.
understand it, your question is, how does rationalism bring in scientific understanding and scientific knowledge into the world? Is that broadly
Scientific
speaking
understanding of human behaviour.
of human behaviour? Okay. Because we don't have a lot of time to go through this, what I'm going to point to is what I would like to call the rationalist Bible, and that is Steven Pinker's latest book, Enlightenment Now. This is a book which has been criticised from a number of different perspectives, but in this book he puts forward the case for progress, humanism, and science and reason, and argues that these are 4 of the major factors of the Enlightenment which actually have worked. The application of those 4 factors has worked, and the middle part of his book is a wonderful collection of data and information which show that since the Enlightenment, the application of science, reason, and humanism has led to progress, and the data show it in terms of human well-being, health, education, reduction in mortality, reduction in violent death, lots and lots of measured progress, despite the fact that many people still believe that we're going backwards. It's not true. As Paul said, you need to pull back from a longer perspective, and if you do that, you will find that actually human society, not just in developed worlds, but around the world, human society has progressed. That's where you see, at least it's one expression of the impact of science.
And again, I just want to marry the conversation between reason, progress, evolution, science and Islam. They're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, Islam requires only those that are truly learned will truly appreciate and understand Islam. So you can't take stuff literally. You need to be able to be metaphoric. You need to be able to be symbolic. And all those things come from progress and knowledge. And the young woman's question back there is nothing in Islam. In fact, Islam sought to elevate the status of women. The practice, the barbaric practice and the subjugation of women that's happening across the Muslim world, again goes back to what I was saying earlier, is a departure from Islamic principles. Nothing in Islam inherently attributes oppression to women. And that is where I found, when I said that I went through a journey and a transformation, I came back and found my utmost empowerment inside a system of belief that can afford roles and responsibilities to both the citizens, but to all living things, to nature, to the environment, to the animal world, etc. So unless you're referring to specific social systems like Saudi, Iran, I'm in absolute agreement with you that they hinder the development of women and our expression, but that is not what Islam requires. Islam requires the opposite of that.
Thank you. We have just last question of the lady over here I cut short before, sorry.
Thank you. Jessica Swan from Benevolence Australia. Thank you very much to the panel. It's so enlightening to hear this. I just wanted to share my observations. To me, it feels both inside the Muslim world and also indeed the non-Muslim world in the Western diaspora, people are very confused as to what Islam actually is. And I really applaud you, sir, when you mentioned just a few moments ago, no one has defined the terms of reference that we've spoken about. We've heard mention of the word jihad. No one's talked about what jihad is. We've talked extensively about Sharia. No one's talked about what the actual word means and what the principles of Sharia actually are. So what it seems to me is we're having this discourse, and the question is, who controls the narrative? Because I would suggest, and Dr. Monk, I'm very interested to know your thoughts on this from a historical perspective, foreign policy perspective. If we go back to, say, the Sykes-Picot, I'd be really interested in this room alone. I'm sure we've got a very educated room, but I'm really interested to know who is familiar and reasonably familiar with the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
I'm sorry, we can't,
Yeah.
we haven't got time to go to that now.
That demonstrates my point. My point is that the Orientalist narrative has controlled this for a long, long time, and it's only post 9/11 that we're able to have these discussions, which are vitally important. So my question, and I'm sorry for the prelogue on this, but my question, Dr. Monk, is, in your experience, to what extent would you say that the last 100 years of foreign policy and an understanding of history has really shaped our very misguided understanding of Islam currently today?
I wouldn't say that I look back beyond the last 100 years and find a particularly enlightened understanding of Islam in the West. Islam was regarded for most of Western history, with the exception of some educated and courtly circles, as alien and outside and even hostile. And that's the root, far more than Sykes-Picot, of the difficulties we still have. there were intermittent efforts here and there to bring the three monotheistic religions together. There were variations in mutual tolerance depending on who was on top and how fundamentalist they were. So I don't think that I would be inclined to pinpoint a time in which the shutters came down. I don't think that they were ever really up, if you take my meaning. And I think if we're going to...
Because if we look at 800 years in Spain, for example, under Muslim rule.
now
I
it's,
think, look, I'm sorry, I think we'll have to continue.
Yeah.
You'll have to continue the discussion
Have a
afterwards because
we're just about...
I should have brought it to a close 4 minutes ago, and I've been notified of that, and I'm going to have to close it down now so that poor Ahmed can actually have a chance to say something himself. So if you could talk afterwards.
I just had one sentence to add to that, and Meredith encouraged me to make this remark earlier, and I forgot. In fact, there wasn't really an occasion. I've had, Ahmed said, 7 books published last decade, 10 in fact. Well, the 10th is now in press. But I'm now writing an epic historical novel about Abdurrahman I, who founded the Emirate of Cordoba, precisely to explore these questions. It's an immensely interesting undertaking. And I hope that it will be made into a major TV series. So watch this space.
Game of Thrones. Muslim.
Thank you, Barney. Let's give a round of applause to all our panelists.